Welcome to Below the Line with Dr. Bennie Harris. The Chancellor of the University of South Carolina Upstate talks with top leaders about issues such as change, technology, education, and leadership. Please enjoy.
Welcome to Below the Line, a monthly podcast where I have an opportunity to talk with a distinguished leader. I'm excited today to be able to talk to Mr. Alan Smith. We talk about change, technology, education, and leadership. Alan is the President and Chief Executive Officer of OneSpartanburg. Alan, let's jump straight into it. I want to start by going back in time. Tell me where you were raised and what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And for the listeners, I think it's important to point out Bennie is on my board, so he's one of my 17 bosses. So I'm going to flatter him as much as I can during this podcast.
That was not in the script, but I love it, Alan.
But it's authentic because I really appreciate your leadership and what you've done here at USC Upstate. It's an important institution, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I was born and raised in Greenville, North Carolina, right in between Raleigh and the coast. Interesting story. I was a son of a teen mom. My parents, hastily got married, and they were together about 8 years, and then they got divorced. And so then at that point in time, my mom was a single mom of 3 boys. Dad's still very much involved, but they were divorced, and so single mom, 3 boys. She's a receptionist at a law firm. So I think sometimes, people may see the suit and they may see the big job title, but, I know what it's like to, I don't want to say struggle, because we were incredibly blessed and my grandparents were always very involved. But I can understand the plight of a lot of people, and I think that's helped me with my role. And so speaking of, being raised and what I wanted to do and so on and so forth, first-generation college student, I was fortunate enough to be admitted to East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. So I went to college in my hometown, and really I struggled mightily. Folks would come up to me and say, have you seen the syllabus? And I would say the Scylla who? Because, when you come from a family where no one has a 4-year degree, those terms just aren't familiar. Navigating the FAFSA, all the registrar's office, all of these things were foreign to me. And so I really struggled. And quite honestly, I had a lot of maturing to do as well. I am not ashamed to say this, but the end of my first semester, I guess I should be ashamed to say it, I finished with a 0.6 GPA.
Well, the context is where you are today.
Right, so. Right. And I remember my grandfather said, my granddaddy said, I don't know much about this college game, but should you at least try to have a whole number on your GPA? And I said, yes, sir. So, got put on academic probation, and, really had to get serious. And quite honestly, what turned me around was a young lady I met who is now my wife. And she basically said, I'm not going to be getting serious with somebody that's going to flunk out of college. So I got serious, and that's when I started thinking about career. And really what I wanted to do is I wanted to be a city manager, a county manager. Okay. So I started in that direction, decided I wanted to major in political science. Okay.
So who was the leader that inspired you growing up, and why?
Well, personally, my granddaddy. Okay. When you have teen mom and you have young grandparents, naturally, it's just a numbers game. And so my grandparents were always very involved in my life. My granddaddy particularly, he had polio. He has polio, still living, thriving, as a matter of fact. But he really came from nothing, pretty much an alcoholic, absent father. His mother raised 5 on her own, so very, very poor. And he worked hard, and he never became rich. But I saw so many lessons from him in terms of what it means to be a father, what it means to be a husband, what it means to be a godly example, and what hard work looks like. And so personally, he's always been my hero. Professionally, Dr. Leo Jenkins, and that's a name that people around here probably are not going to know, but he was a pioneering chancellor back when East Carolina University was East Carolina College. Okay. And one of the things that I liked about him that's so applicable to what's happening in Spartanburg right now is There were things that he was doing at East Carolina that people laughed at,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, you can't do that. You know, East Carolina will never do this, will never amount to this. East Carolina's not going to get a medical school. East Carolina's not going to have a D1 football program, so on and so forth, or athletics program in general. And basically his personality and his mantra was, tell us we won't and watch us while we do.
Okay.
And I respect that. And I think a lot of that personality and that grit and that tenacity represents Spartanburg.
Interestingly, I'm glad we started there because it gives me a context to the leadership you're currently providing to Spartanburg. You are the CEO of Spartanburg, Inc., OneSpartanburg. Give us an overview of what it is, what's its mission, and what role does it play in the upstate region of South Carolina?
So from 1918 to 2020, the organization was known as the Spartanburg Area Chamber of Commerce. But we started having conversations around there's got to be a better way to do this. You know, you've got a separate economic development organization, you've got a separate tourism organization, you have a separate chamber, you have all that overhead. You really have an opportunity to capitalize on synergy, but you're divided by silos and fiefdoms and competition for attention and budgets and so on and so forth. So in September of 2020, we said no more in Spartanburg. We are going to consolidate the work of business, economic, and tourism development and create OneSpartanburg, Inc. Day one, we cut our overhead by 48%. So we're able to go to the community and saying, look, you're investing in us and your money is going a long way. And so for 4 years, we've been operating under that model. It's the only consolidated model of development in North and South Carolina. So I have a very unique role. I am not just a chamber CEO because a chamber vertical is really only now a quarter of who we are because we've added talent as a core focus of what we do. So, you know, I know that's probably a long answer, but when people say you're the CEO of the chamber, that's only partly correct given the way we do it here in Spartanburg.
So we started out talking about OneSpartanburg becoming a 3-in-1.
Right.
The economic development, chamber, and tourism, those things. And now you're saying it's a 4-in-1 because you have added talent as a fourth component of the mission of OneSpartanburg. What advantages does that give OneSpartanburg, Inc. in terms of navigating the upstate of South Carolina from an economic development perspective?
Well, first and foremost, we're more effective and we're more efficient. You know, there's some counties in South Carolina where there's 8, 9 chambers, 8, 9 economic development organizations, you know, maybe even 2 or 3 tourism organizations. In Spartanburg, there's only one.
Okay.
2 other reasons why I think we're more effective, and that has to do with dropping the chamber brand. And we got some heat for that. People would say, well, why would you drop the chamber brand? You know, everybody knows what the chamber does. No, they don't. People call us and say their trash wasn't picked up. I mean, that's a local government function.
Yeah.
You know, so we dropped the chamber brand for 2 reasons. Number one, the perception of a chamber of commerce is it's the place where, you know, old white guys smoke cigars, drink bourbon, and make decisions on behalf of the community. And that wasn't our reality, but it was a lot of people's perception, and so why not get away from that? The other perception of a chamber is in order to engage with that organization, I have to be a member. Well, member is perhaps the most exclusive word in the English language. I'm a part of this, you're not. And so we're not a pay-to-play membership organization. We are obligated to serve all. So with that mindset, we dropped the chamber brand. And so, again, having all of these entities together, having all of these incredibly talented professionals together with varied backgrounds, in a lot of ways, we're unstoppable.
Okay. So when you think about OneSpartanburg, what would you assess as being one of its biggest accomplishments over the last couple of years or so?
Well, I mean, my history only goes back 10 years, but in those 10 years, we've recruited 243 projects, 17,438 new jobs, and $12 billion in new investment. That's a run that hasn't been matched in South Carolina. So, you know, measurable impact is incredibly important, and I am so proud when I see someone wearing a Keurig Dr. Pepper uniform or an Oshkosh uniform, or soon we're going to see folks in Milo's tea uniform, so on and so forth, knowing that our organization helped someone on their journey to go to a different economic plane.
Okay.
And that's really what it's all about. And I think we're going to talk about that in a moment about Spartanburg's commitment to improving economic mobility.
So you're known for this high level of energy and innovation in your leadership style, et cetera. So what core principles guide your approach to leadership, especially in the context of community and economic development?
Purpose.
Let's talk about that a little more.
Well, and with no disrespect to anybody that gets up every single morning and sells insurance, that's just not going to make me tick.
Okay.
I need to be tied to a purpose. I need to know, just personally, I need to know that what I'm going to do is going to have a greater impact. And so that drives me, it motivates me. I think it's energizing. I think it's one of the reasons why we've got the best team that we've ever had, because the people that are in that building right now are motivated by purpose as well. I mean, we understand the stakes are high. Sometimes nonprofits might get a bad rap of kind of being, kind of fluffy and rainbows and unicorn type stuff. And we don't have that mindset at One Spartanburg Inc. because we know what's at stake.
Yeah. I want to just pause here because last evening you had your annual event.
Don't call it a meeting. It's a celebration. Nobody wants to go to an annual meeting.
Where you were able to recognize and honor several community leaders and teachers, et cetera. So you were surprised with an honor of the Chairman's Award from the board. Tell us about that surprise. Actually, in the program booklet, they had another person listed for that award intentionally to throw you off the track. So
they did, and that individual is a good friend and a great leader in his own right, William Gray. And William Gray is actually a part of a little running group that I'm a part of. And so all week long, I had been telling our running group people, make sure you come Thursday night. William Gray's getting this big award. William wasn't getting it. I was getting it. And so I was totally shocked, honored, humbled, and I'll just repeat, what I said last night on the cuff, and that is I'm old school. And so, I believe my recognition comes on the 15th and 30th. And so that's not last night wasn't necessary. I'm very grateful for it. My job isn't a job anymore. I mean, when you have kids, and my role is personal. It's personal. And so I really appreciated that, despite all the lies and deception to lead up to it. Yeah.
Well, again, congratulations.
Thank you.
So you talked about what you aspired when you were in college to be a city manager particularly. Could you share a bit about your journey in economic development and what first attracted you to the field of economic development?
So my first job, I was actually appointed, and I say appointed, I had to interview for it. And you talk about an intimidating first real job interview. I mean, I worked in cornfields, I worked at Chick-fil-A, I worked at a law firm, but I'm saying a real job. I interviewed in front of a mayor and 6 town commissioners to be the town clerk for a small town in eastern North Carolina called Bethel, North Carolina. And I was blessed enough to get that role. And it was an incredible exposure to local government.
Okay.
And in a town that small, you are town hall. I mean, I was doing everything from processing payroll to issuing order to Public Works because a pothole needed to be fixed. I mean, everything. Okay. And so great exposure to government. We didn't really have a lot of economic development cooking in Bethel, North Carolina, but long story short, there was a vice president role opened at the Greenville, North Carolina Chamber of Commerce. I was woefully underqualified, but I applied, and I ended up getting it. And that's when I really got exposed to a Chamber of Commerce. Now, we didn't have economic development in-house in that organization, and a lot of them don't. But I still was able to see the impacts of economic development and the impacts a chamber can have. I'll tell you something else. I respect the heck out of city manager and a county manager. I respect those people because think about this. You come into a role and you report to a city commission or a town commissioner or a county council. your bosses are sent to you by the people,
Right.
and they can literally change every year depending upon the outcome of an election.
Okay.
And so that may have been one of the reasons why I got out of that game and decided that I wanted to go to maybe an organization to still interact with board members, but have a part of the nominating process too. And so, and here we are, literally almost 20 years later, and have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay. So One Spartanburg has an ambitious goal of making Spartanburg the best place to live in the South, to live, to work, and to play by 2030. Can you tell us a little about that goal and the path of getting there?
Well, I think what you might be referring to is Movement 2030,
Yeah.
which is the Spartanburg Academic Movement's plan, but it's a plan that has been built on the plans of One Spartanburg, Inc. and a few other organizations. And essentially, Dallas, San Antonio, and Spartanburg were given a $50 million grant from Blue Meridian, which is a $4.3 billion philanthropic fund. And those three communities would get the money on the condition that they would raise $50 million themselves.
Okay.
And Spartanburg did it first, before Dallas, before San Antonio. And so $100 million plus, because Russell and his team have done such a good job raising
Talking about
more
Russell
money.
Booker?
Dr. Russell Booker,
Yes,
yes. So now we have about between $120 million to invest in economic mobility in Spartanburg County through 2030. So there's all kinds of goals about regarding kindergarten readiness, our high school seniors persisting to college. Once you're in college, persisting. There's 50,000 people in Spartanburg County that have some college and no degree. We want to get them back in the game. So yes, it's an ambitious goal. But I believe that we're going to get there, and we're going to meet a lot of our metrics because we come together and we collaborate like no community I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, expound on that, because One Spartanburg Vision Plan 2.0 that can be found on your website aligns their alignment with Movement 2030 and the goal of educational goals, talent development, et cetera. So expound on that level of collaboration and how then the alignment.
So this speaks perfect to our model. So those of you that are listening that have lived here for 40, 50, 60 years, you will remember what happened as far as our economy is concerned when textiles left the upstate.
Okay.
40, 50,000 jobs gone just like this. And part of the reason that happened is all our eggs were in one basket. We were solely focused on textiles. Well, over the past, 20, 25 years, we've replaced those jobs and then some. But back in 2016, when we started this strategic planning process, the facilitator said, you're heading in the similar direction in terms of advanced manufacturing. It's our bread and butter. It always will be. But your job composition is way out of whack in terms of tilting heavy in that direction. And you really need to look at diversifying your economic development approach so you can withstand, changes in economic conditions. But one of the impediments to that, Benny, is education attainment. We have to raise our education attainment rates if we want to be competitive as it relates to life science jobs, corporate HQs, regional back offices, so on and so forth. And so you think about our model. Well, here we are now. We've got somebody in talent that's focused on education attainment. If they're successful, that means the economic development team can be successful in recruiting some of these life science, knowledge-based jobs. And they're all in the same building. They're all under the same roof, literally talking with each other every single day.
So what do you think some of the key elements to taking a region that was highly in one industry, textile, and that industry no longer exists at that level that it existed? So it decimates the workforce. There are other regions around the country, with whether it's in steel or whether it's in coal or whether it's automobile manufacturing, from a historical perspective, that were decimated as well. What are the key elements that have made Spartanburg to now be as vibrant as it is as a community? What happened in this community that may be different in other communities?
Well, BMW Plant Spartanburg came to Spartanburg and came to South Carolina because they saw something in that displaced textile worker cohort.
Okay.
He said these people, they understand hard work, they're committed, they're dedicated, they've been doing work with their hands, they understand, obviously they didn't know how to drive they didn't know how to build the world's ultimate driving machine. But again, BMW and the folks from Germany saw something in our workforce.
Okay.
And that's one of the several reasons why we won that project. And so BMW plant Spartanburg changed the game. But I will say, too, they aren't the only game in town anymore. I mean, we're seeing a beverage cluster emerge. Believe it or not, we are seeing a cycling soft mobility cluster form in Landrum. 3 companies now in that space and more to come. And so, again, our economy, slowly but surely, is diversifying. We have been able to land some corporate HQs in downtown Spartanburg. A Novosphere, a lot of people don't know that name, don't know that entity. You will. This is a group that's committed to building life science companies. They have decided to headquarter in Spartanburg. And so we're beginning to see that wheel turn as it relates to diversification.
And how does the educational institutions play into that?
Critical, absolutely critical. I think it's one of our strongest suits. The fact that we've got 7 institutions of higher learning in Spartanburg County, we're sitting at one that offers the most skill.
Okay.
And that's critically important. Largest institution west of Columbia aside from Clemson. And so we need thousands more degrees because in the world of economic development, particularly in site selection, when they're looking at degree attainment numbers, we don't even make some lists. So you want to get to the point where you're in that 25, 30, 35% 4-year degree attainment, and then all of a sudden we're getting on a list that we were never on before. And really, I believe the path to it goes through USC Upstate.
So I would like to talk a little bit about leading below the line. That's what this podcast is called. And it was coined because when I think about leadership, oftentimes it's easy to think about what the data shows us. It's easy to, not easy, but you know what you're leading. You know what the issues are. When you happen to lead and you don't know what those issues are, how does a leader lead below the line? How do you lead in your capacity, not knowing the things that may be interest to one group or interest to another, and you don't know what those things are?
Well, Benny, you and I have a lot of conversations. There's a lot of dynamics that are always swirling around. And so one of the things that I've tried to prioritize is seeking to understand.
Okay.
It seems like the older I get and the more people I meet, the more I realize I don't know. And so I try to do everything I can to understand people. I mean, just personally, everybody's is walking through something.
Okay.
We all put on social media that everything's great, but everybody's walking through something. I love the iceberg illustration. We've all seen it. You can see the top of the iceberg, but you can't see what's under the water. And so I'm always trying to seek to understand. I think the easy road in a leader is to say, well, I appreciate your opinion, but we're not going to do it that way. Well, I try to take the stance of, well, I appreciate your opinion. Why do you have that? Help me understand, and then react accordingly.
Okay. Thank you. I'm curious, do you have a hero?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've said before, my granddaddy is my living hero.
Okay. So how would you describe yourself as a leader? And what do you think others would say about you when asked what kind of leader you are?
Well, I hope folks would say that I lead with empathy. I hope folks would say that I'm effective. I appreciate the energy thing, but misguided energy might not be a good thing. So maybe focused energy, and I think scaled. I mean, it needs to matter, right? I mean, we're entrusted with so many resources that, you do something that impacts 10, 15 people. I mean, that's great, but we need to really look at data. And so I think people would tell you that I'm data oriented as well. I think on the negative side, our team would say this sometimes too. I often shoot and aim later. But I think pace is important. Life is so short. our professional lives are so short, and as I said before, the stakes are so high. So you can only analyze and aim and analyze and aim for so long. You got to act at some point.
You've been here 10 years. During that time, what are the 2 things that you're most proud of and keep you motivated?
2 things. Well, I mentioned before, nearly 20,000 new jobs over the past 10 years, and that's just an easy metric to throw out, but I mean, that's impacting families really all over the region. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of, there was a big gap in terms of Spartanburg being represented sufficiently in Columbia, and I think we've stood in that gap in a major way. Over 3 years, brought $73.5 million to Spartanburg for key economic development projects. I think on the local level, we've led the campaign to pass 2 pennies, 1 penny for projects like the courthouse, emergency operations center, new police department. South Carolina's coming soon, only city-county facility. And then in November, we did something that unfortunately Greenville was unable to do, Anderson was unable to do, Lancaster and Charleston in this last election, and that was pass a 6-year penny committed to roads. That's $500 million over the next 6 years that will be invested in our roads, making them safer. We had some of the most dangerous roads in South Carolina, so literally some of these investments are going to save lives.
So I do want to say, in Columbia, our capital of South Carolina, Spartanburg County has elevated. It's part of the story is really becoming a standard and is being talked about a lot more. So I really credit that to your and so many others' leadership, but definitely you leading One Spartanburg at the helm. Alan Smith, thank you so very much for spending time with us. Thank you for taking time to participate with Leading Below the Line. So again, Alan Smith, CEO of OneSpartanburg, Inc. Thank you again.
Thank you, Benny.
The Below the Line podcast is brought to you by the University of South Carolina Upstate. Look for our monthly write-up in Greenville Business Magazine, and for more information, go to uscupstate.edu.